Hello and welcome back to Explain USA. Today we're diving into a scenario that sent an absolute shockwave through the global order. It's the story of a superpower suddenly finding itself on the back foot. Let's get right into it.
We're jumping straight into the action. Day 36 of a really tense conflict. Something has just happened that we haven't seen in decades. For the first time in a generation, that long-held belief in absolute American air superiority, well, it's being seriously questioned.
Okay, to really get how big a deal this is, you have to look at the history. The last time the US lost this many planes was way back in 1991 during Desert Storm. But since then, look at this, just 2 aircraft in Kosovo, a single plane during the entire Iraq War. So to see 7, maybe more, confirmed losses today, that shatters a myth of American invincibility in the sky that stood for nearly 40 years.
And, we're not just talking about numbers on a page. These are frontline, high-value assets. We're talking F-15E Strike Eagles, each one costing a cool $100 million a pop. But what's maybe even more telling is the USS Abraham Lincoln, pulling an entire aircraft carrier strike group 1,000 kilometers away from the fight. That's not exactly a power move, it's a defensive one, and it's a clear signal that the battlefield has fundamentally changed.
So, you have to ask, how did we get to this point? Well, the catalyst for this whole crisis wasn't some slow-burning diplomatic failure. Nope. It was a single explosive event that basically lit the fuse.
And this was it. This was the spark. Not a formal declaration of war, not some stuffy cable from the State Department, but an all-caps post on social media. The message from Donald Trump was aggressive, it was direct, and it ended with that really bizarre sign-off, "Glory to God." This thing just bypassed every traditional diplomatic channel there is, and it threw gasoline on the fire in the most public way imaginable.
And let's be crystal clear about the threat itself. This wasn't about hitting military bases or missile silos. The promise was to destroy the things a country needs to actually function, power, water, transportation. This was a threat aimed squarely at the daily life of the civilian population.
So the threat is made, and the whole world is holding its breath, waiting to see how Iran would respond. What came next was this incredibly tense standoff that, pretty quickly, got very personal. This right here really gets to the core of the 2 different ways of looking at this conflict. The US was focused on the physical, right? Tangible destruction. But Iran's official response, which came through Abbas Araghchi, framed the stakes completely differently. They basically said, look, we can rebuild bridges and buildings. What you can't rebuild is your country's reputation and moral standing on the world stage. And amidst all this high-stakes geopolitical chess, the entire massive conflict became symbolized not by some new weapon or a grand policy, but by a single person.
An F-15E gets shot down, and suddenly the focus of America's entire military machine shrinks down to finding one person, a weapons systems operator lost somewhere in this huge, hostile mountain range. The US even went so far as to ask for a 48-hour pause in the fighting just to find their person. Iran said no. This desperate search for one individual, it just perfectly captures the precarious and kind of lonely spot America found itself in.
All right, so tensions are at a boiling point. Military options are proving to be way more costly than anyone expected, and there's a pilot missing behind enemy lines. Out of all that chaos, a single, very narrow diplomatic off-ramp has started to emerge.
They're calling it the never for never deal. And it's seen as this incredibly thin, time-sensitive opportunity for both countries to take a step back from the edge without having to look like they lost.
And the deal itself is actually pretty straightforward when you break it down. It's a mutual promise. The US says we will never attack Iran again. In exchange, Iran says we will never attack US bases or interests in the region. And then there's the third piece, the real kicker. All economic sanctions on Iran get lifted. It's a really profound trade-off, right? Security in exchange for a normal economy.
So now let's zoom out, because this whole conflict, it doesn't just exist in a bubble. A lot of analysts are pointing to it as a powerful case study for a much bigger argument, an argument about the current state of American power in the world.
It really starts with this number, $37 trillion. That is the absolutely staggering size of the US national debt. It's like this massive economic pressure cooker that's quietly sitting under every single strategic decision, and it limits the options and makes any long-term fight incredibly expensive.
And just look where the money is going.
While the military budget is ballooning up to $1.5 trillion, that cash is being pulled from domestic things like education and healthcare. A lot of people look at this and see a classic sign of an empire in trouble, prioritizing force abroad over investing in its own foundation at home.
This conflict is also throwing a spotlight on other cracks that were already there. The US dollar is facing new challenges, global supply chains are a mess, and the deep, bitter political divide back home makes it almost impossible to agree on anything, especially foreign policy. It all adds up to a feeling of a system under enormous strain. Which brings us to the final critical question that this whole situation leaves us with. With its military superiority challenged, its economy looking shaky, and its global standing on the line, is the United States now facing an impossible choice? Either accept a humbling deal that admits the world has changed, or risk getting pulled into a catastrophic war that it might not even be able to win. If you like informative videos, you can subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.